it's Emma and I'm back with another astrology video. And in today's video, I'm going to be going over the house systems that most astrologers use when analyzing a chart. I'm going to be talking about the Placidus house system and the whole sign house system, the differences between the two and which one I use and why. Now, this can be a bit of a heated debate in the astrological community. So a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions, some stronger than others, but I'm going to try to give you a fair analysis of both so you can determine which one you want to use for yourself. But I do have my preference, and I'll be sharing that with you today and explaining why I use this house system and why it works for me in my practice. So before you even pull up your chart, before you even start looking at your chart or analyzing it, it's so important to pick a house system. And most people, when they're first starting out, don't realize this, or maybe don't even know that there's differences between house systems, because when you're pulling up your birth chart online and using any of the birth chart calculators, they are going to default to Placidus unless you physically change it yourself. So that's why most people, when they're first starting out, when they're first looking into their birth chart or they're first learning about astrology, they usually are working with the Placidus house system, and that's how they know their chart to be. And this is because most modern astrologers started using Placidus in more recent years when astrology had a comeback after it wasn't being practiced for many years, when there was a loss of most of the original ancient astrological text. So when astrology had a comeback, a lot of the astrologers, the more modern astrologers, wanted to use astrology as a tool to help people to understand their psychology better, to help counsel people, to use astrology as a tool for people to understand their emotions and process their emotions. So astrology took a turn in that way. Whereas when astrology originated, traditional Western astrology was used to be predictive. It wasn't about a person's psychology. It was used as a way to predict world events, or if an astrologer was doing a natal analysis, it would be used to predict different experiences or events that that person would have in their lifetime. So the career path that that person would have, or what would happen in their love life, their experiences in dating and love, or just whatever experiences were showing up in the chart. It was used as a way to be predictive. So it wasn't back then about understanding a person's deepest emotions or their psychology. So during that time when astrology originated, whole signs was the house system that was being used, and it was the original house system. Now, when astrology fell out of fashion, when a lot of the original texts were lost, a lot of the original techniques were lost as well. So when astrology had its comeback in the West and people were practicing it more, a lot of the original traditional techniques were not being utilized anymore. And a lot of the reason for this was because a lot of people didn't know about them, because a lot of the information was lost and hadn't been recovered yet. So a lot of the technicalities were taken out. Several new techniques were added because of the loss of these ancient texts, but several of these techniques, since there was not that foundation of the original teachings from the ancient texts, since there was no access to them, a lot of these techniques were just sort of made up. And then there was, of course, the addition of the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, because those were discovered. So that was added. But a lot of the techniques did change, and one of the main ones being the change of house systems. And then one of my favorite astrologers, Robert Hand, who started as a modern Western astrologer, him and a few other people decided to take it upon themselves to revive the old ancient texts and translate them. And this was called Project Project Hindsight, where they committed a lot of their time to translating these ancient texts to revive the original astrological tradition of traditional Hellenistic astrology and to discover what these original techniques really were, what was really being used in ancient times when astrology started. So through doing this, he was convinced, and he discovered enough of these texts and teachings to convince him that he should test out and try reading charts using whole signs instead of Placidus, which is what he was using originally in his practice. And he began using whole signs from there on out because he found it to be more accurate in his practice, and he has written a book about it called Whole Sign Houses, the Oldest House System. And when I read that, because I started reading charts when I first was introduced to astrology, I started reading them in Placidus, but when I found Robert Hand and I saw all the work that he has done and I read that book from him, it really convinced me to consider using whole signs. So I started looking at my chart using whole signs and other people's charts, and it was a difficult transition at first just because I think that we have such attachment to what we're familiar with, especially when it comes to ourselves. So I was used to knowing my chart, reading it in Placidus. So I was used to those placements. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me to just go in without any judgments and to just run charts and see how it worked out. And I found it to be very accurate, and especially to predict things that I've experienced in my life and running charts that way for people. And it also resonates with how I feel as well. So I think that it can be used for both, not just to make predictions. And my only thing with that is I think that people can resonate with anything that they want to, with whatever they convince themselves that they connect with or can resonate with, because a lot of that comes with our ego. That's why people have such a hard time trying to not focus so much on how they knew their chart originally and seeing it in a different house system, because we have this attachment to what we're familiar with, to what we know and what we want to see. And a lot of the times we only want to see what our ego wants us to see. So in terms of that, I think it can be difficult to really determine how accurate a house system is just based off of how much you psychologically feel like you relate to it. And I think that from my experience looking at charts, I think that people can relate to their feelings just as much as they can to events that they've experienced in terms of looking at a chart using whole signs. So I don't think that whole signs can only be used as a way to make predictions. I think that it can also be used to work with someone's psychology, to help them understand their psychology, and to counsel someone as well. So obviously, as you can probably tell, I use whole signs, but I didn't start off using whole signs. I started out using Placidus, and over time I've just transitioned to this, as I think more and more astrologers are. But I think that you should just try reading charts in both. Take some time to see what works for you and make your decision based off of that. But through analyzing charts using whole signs, it's just been what has worked for me, been better for me. And I also like working with whole signs more because it's more organized, it's neater, it's easier to work with because it splits up a person's chart evenly, and a person's ascendant is always the sign of their first house, and then the order of the houses follows after that. So when you are determining rulership of houses, it's easy to look at because there's only one sign there. Therefore, you can easily determine what the planetary ruler is for that house. It's just neater, more organized. I just prefer to work with it, but I'll leave that up to you, what works better for you and what you like working with more. But I'm going to show you two different charts, one with Placidus, one with whole signs, in case you aren't familiar with them or you don't really know that much about different house systems. I'm going to just show you quickly what the differences are. Okay, for this example, I pulled up the birth chart of Britney Spears just because I had it on hand for an example for another video I was filming. But I pulled up her chart here using Placidus, and as you can see, her houses are are not equally divided. There is some overlap there, and specifically, let's look at her 11th house. So we see that her 11th house is in between the sign of Leo and Virgo. So to determine the ruler of her house, you look at the house cusp, the sign on the cusp of that house, and then that is how you would determine the ruler using Placidus. However, for me, it's just a little bit messier. It's not as organized. Whereas if you're looking at a chart using whole signs, which I'll pull up her chart using whole signs right now, you can see that all of the houses are equally divided and there is one sign for each house, and that entire sign becomes the house, and there's no question there. You can just clearly see it more in a more organized way. So just from the visual standpoint and being able to immediately look at a chart and tell instantly what sign is the sign of that house and what the planetary ruler is, it's just visually easier. But I recommend that you run charts in both and then you figure out for yourself which one you would prefer to use, just based off of your own experience, and also educating yourself on why people choose one house versus the other. So hopefully this video helped you if you were on the fence between one or the other, or maybe you didn't really know about a different house system. So I hope that this helped you. Leave comments down below what house system you use and why you use that house system. I would love to hear from you guys, but I want to thank you again for watching this video, and I hope to see you in my next one.